In this quick video, I want to show you the latest updates on the TablePop Excel. Now, if you've never heard about TablePop before, then check out the previous video here on my channel. In a nutshell, with TablePop, you can turn any Excel table into an interactive and searchable HTML file with just one click of a button. Now, after I released the first version, I've got a ton of emails with feature requests and also a couple of bug reports. So in this short video, I will walk you through all the new features and fixes I have added since the initial release. Okay, so without further ado, let us dive in. Alright, so in the new version you now have a settings menu, and when you open it, you will now see all the new features I have added. First of all, you can now enable horizontal scrolling and also freeze the first column. So this can be helpful if you have a wide table. That means your table has many columns. So to show you how that looks like, let me close the menu here and create the HTML file. Alright, and now down here, if I scroll down a little bit, you will now see a horizontal scroll bar. And when I scroll to the right, you will also notice that the first column is not frozen. Now, alternatively, you can also enable responsive mode. So let me take this and save my settings. This time when I export my table, you will notice that only the columns that actually fit on your screen will be shown. All the other columns are collapsed, and you can also show those if you click on here. So this can be helpful especially on mobile devices, because on smartphones it is usually a better user experience if you don't have to scroll to the right. Alright, next up, let me also show you the other features. So now here, as you can see, you can now also enable column reordering and also show the pagination on top and show a column visibility indicator. So let me activate those settings and generate the report again. Alright, so to reorder a column, you just click the column you want to reorder, hold down the left mouse button, and then just drag it to the position where you want it and then release the mouse button. Also, you will now see that the pagination here is on top. And if you hide any columns, so for example, let me hide the full name, you will get an indication bar here showing that not all the columns are currently visible in your report. Now, and speaking of hiding columns, previously if you have hidden some columns and exported your report to a PDF file, all the columns were still visible on the PDF export. But now there's a new settings to avoid that. So back in the settings menu, you will now see here in the export option that you can only export visible columns. So that means if you have hidden some columns in your report, those won't be then not exported to PDF. And also speaking of the PDF itself, you can now also set the orientation mode. So previously it was only in portrait mode, but now you can also switch it to landscape. Alright, and with that, let me also show you the new output options. So here by default your HTML file will be always saved in a workbox folder. But if you want, you can also change that. For example, you can use a documents folder or even enter a custom path. So that means you can enter your path in here or simply select a folder by clicking on this button. Alright, and here further down you can now also specify the output name. By default it was always a table name, so for example tablename.html. But now if you want, you can also include the worksheet name or also the workbook name. And you can also see a little preview of the file path here. Now also by default, TablePop won't overwrite your existing files. Instead, it will always create a new version number. So for example, if you have this output name and create the report again, it will then create version 1, version 2 and so on and so forth. However, if you want, you can now also overwrite existing files by enabling this option here. Alright, and if you don't want to have an auto-generated file name, you can also use a custom file name. For that, you just enable this option here and then type in your file name in this box here. Okay, and with that in place, let me actually switch back the output location to the workbox folder and show you the new branding options. So here in the branding section, you can now show or hide the header and also specify the title and the subtitle. So the title, for example, was always a table name, but if you want, you can now also pick a custom title and also a custom subtitle. Now, as soon as you enter a custom title or subtitle, you can now also use placeholders inside those. So for example, here you can say that this report was created on date at the following time. And then those placeholders will be then replaced with the actual values. And you have currently access to the table name, the workbook name, the sheet name, and as I've shown here, you can also use a date and time. Alright, next up, you can also choose your primary color. For that, you just click on this button here, and then you can enter either your hexadecimal code or using a RGB color code. Now in my case, to keep it simple, I will just pick a color from here. Okay, and to make your report really look like yours, you can now also include the header logo. So for that, let me grab an URL and paste it right in here. Now here just note that your logo should be hosted somewhere online, so a local file path won't work. Alright, and with that, let me save and close the setting and regenerate the report. Alright, so now as you can see, we've got our custom title and subtitle, and also here in the subtitle, you can now see that my placeholders have been replaced with the actual values. Also on the right side, you can now see the logo I have included. And also everything uses our primary color. So you've got the header color, the pagination, and also if you hover over any elements or select anything, everything now uses your own color. Oh, and by the way, there's also now a new group by function. So if you click on this button here, you can group your data by any field. So for example, let me group this data here by job title. And then your table will be grouped accordingly. So for example, here we've got the job title CEO, and if I scroll down, you see the coordinator. And for the group by, you can pick really any column you want. So for example, I could also pick industry here. Alright, and just so you know, the branding features and also the group by functionality is only available in the paid version, so the pro version. However, all the other features I have showed you before are all included in the free version. Alright, and besides all the new features, there were also a couple of bugs which are also fixed. And to show you those, let me actually go to the changelog. And you can also go to the changelog by clicking on the info button here and clicking on changelog. So here you will now see all the changes I have done. And if I scroll a little bit to the bottom, you will also see the bug fixes. And I think the most common issue was that if you have saved your Excel file on SharePoint or OneDrive, you got an error message. However, in the new version that should be fixed. So now you can also save your HTML report on OneDrive or SharePoint. Now another issue was that you have a large table, so for example 100,000 rows, and you try to export that table, you might get an error message saying that you run out of memory. So now this should be also fixed because the table is now created in chunks. However, that said, even the export might work, the HTML file itself might be kind of slow, because the more data you add, the larger the file size, and that also means the HTML table might be a little bit slow or unresponsive. And unfortunately, there's not really a fix for that. So just keep that in mind if you're trying to export a really large table. Alright, so now that you have seen all the new features and also the bug fixes, let me show you how to update the add-in. So for that you can go back to the add-in, and here in the info button you can click on check for updates. Here you will then see there's a new version available, and if you confirm, this new version will be then also downloaded directly to your computer. And once you have downloaded it, you can follow a short step-by-step video on how to update the add-in. And you can find that video in the documentation. So here in the info section, let me navigate to the documentation. And here in the documentation, you can navigate to how to update TablePop, and here you will find the short video. And I will also make sure to leave the link to this documentation in the description below. Okay, and if you now have the new version installed on your computer, but you might still feel a couple of features are missing, then you can also submit a feature request directly on my feature board. For that, if you go back to the add-in and click again on the info button, you can click on feature request. And this will be then redirected directly to my feature request board, which I also set up. So here you can just simply submit your idea, and I will try to implement the idea with the most upvotes. Okay, and lastly, I also want to take a short moment to thank everyone who upgraded to the Pro version, because this really helps the development. However, I also understand that not everyone wants to upgrade to the Pro version. That said, if you do like TablePop and you want to support this project without paying any money, there's one thing you could do, and that is leaving a Trustpilot review, because this really helps me a lot. So to do that in the new version, if you go back to the info button, you will now see also leave a review. So you just click in here, and then you will be redirected directly to Trustpilot, where you can leave a short review. But I will also make sure to leave this link here in the description box below. So as I said, this would really help me a lot. Alright, and with that, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Cheers!